You got the promotion. You're in the important meeting. You delivered the project on time. From the outside, everyone applauds you. But inside, a silent and terrifying voice whispers, "You're a fraud. They're going to find out. You don't belong here." This feeling of being an imposter, waiting to be unmasked at any moment, isn't a competence problem. It's an echo. The echo of an inner child who learned, at some point in the past, that they weren't good enough. Today we're going to dive into Carl Jung's psychology to understand why your adult ambition is at war with your inner child, and how you can finally sign a peace treaty and feel worthy of your own success. The internal voice of fraud. Have you ever wondered why, even after years of experience, recognized achievements, positive feedback, there's still this persistent feeling that you're pretending, that at any moment someone will raise their hand and say, "Wait, this person doesn't know what they're doing." This isn't just common insecurity. It's something deeper, older. It's impostor syndrome, but not just as an isolated psychological phenomenon. It's the desperate cry of an inner child who still carries wounds of invalidation. Jung said that everything that remains unconscious returns as fate. And that's exactly what happens when we ignore this internal voice. It doesn't disappear. It transforms into self-sabotage at work, paralyzing perfectionism, fear of taking risks, difficulty accepting compliments. Maybe you recognize these patterns, working excessively to prove your worth, minimizing your achievements, attributing success to luck, feeling panic before presentations, or having difficulty negotiating salary because you don't deserve it. This voice of fraud wasn't born yesterday. It has deep roots in your personal history, in how you learn to see your own worth, in the way your inner child was or wasn't validated. The origin of the wounded inner child. Carl Jung revolutionized our understanding by showing that inside every adult lives a child who never really grew up. This inner child carries not only our spontaneity and creativity, but also our deepest wounds and most primitive fears. When we talk about feeling like a fraud at work, we're talking about a child who, at some point, learned that their worth depended on performance, that love was conditional, that they would only be accepted if they were perfect. This lesson could have come in many forms. Maybe you grew up in a family where nothing was ever enough, where every achievement was minimized with a "but you could have done better," where error was synonymous with personal failure. Or maybe it was more subtle. Parents who loved but always with conditions, who said they were proud, but only when you met their expectations, who offered attention only when you were being good or productive. Jung called this the primary narcissistic wound, the moment when the child realizes that their intrinsic worth isn't recognized, that they need to do something to deserve love and approval. This wounded inner child doesn't disappear when you become an adult. They continue there, operating behind the scenes of your professional life, whispering that you're not enough, that you're just pretending to know what you're doing. The mask of competence, the professional persona. Jung developed the concept of persona, the mask we use to navigate the social world. In the professional context, this persona becomes especially complex because it's directly linked to our economic survival and social status. When you feel like a fraud at work, it's not because you're actually incompetent. It's because there's a dissociation between who you feel you are inside, the wounded child, and the professional persona you've built to succeed. This professional persona can be impressively competent. It can have degrees, experience, technical skills, but it can also be rigid, perfectionist, impossible to satisfy because it was built not from your true essence, but from the fear of not being enough. The professional persona of someone who feels like a fraud usually has some specific characteristics. Hypercompensation, works more hours than necessary, takes on more responsibilities, never says no, because they're afraid that if they stop, everyone will realize they don't know what they're doing. Paralyzing perfectionism, reviews work obsessively, delays deliveries for fear of criticism, avoids taking on challenging projects because error is interpreted as evidence of incompetence. Merit deflection, attributes successes to luck, to others' help, to favorable circumstances, never to their own competence, because accepting merit would be admitting they have value, something the wounded inner child can't do. Constant vigilance, constantly monitors others' reactions, seeks signs of approval or disapproval, because they live in fear of being discovered. This persona isn't bad. It was created to protect the wounded inner child. But over time it becomes a prison. limiting your ability to grow, take risks, feel real satisfaction with your achievements. The conflict between ambition and inner child. Here's the cruel paradox. The more you achieve professional success, the more imposter syndrome can intensify, because each new achievement is a new opportunity for the wounded inner child to whisper, "You're fooling everyone. You don't deserve this." Jung spoke about the shadow, everything we deny or reject in ourselves. For many people who feel fraudulent at work, the shadow contains precisely their positive qualities: competence, intelligence, worth, deservingness. The wounded inner child learned that recognizing these qualities in themselves was dangerous, maybe because it generated jealousy from parents, or because in their family bragging was considered a flaw, so they pushed these qualities into the shadow. The result is a person who can be extremely competent, but who can't recognize or accept this competence, who can have brilliant ideas, but always questions whether they're really good, who can lead teams successfully, but always feels like an imposter in the role. This dissociation between external achievements and internal recognition creates a vicious cycle. The more you achieve, the more the inner child feels disconnected from this successful person. It's as if you're watching someone else's life, even though you're the one living it. The shadow of success. Jung discovered that we frequently reject not only negative aspects of ourselves, but also positive aspects that, for some reason, we learn to see as dangerous or inappropriate. In the professional context, this manifests in specific ways. Rejection of one's own intelligence. You may be genuinely intelligent, but have learned that demonstrating intelligence was arrogant or intimidating. So you minimize your ideas, question your conclusions, avoid positions of intellectual leadership. Fear of one's own power. You may have natural leadership capacity, but have learned that exercising power was selfish or manipulative, so you avoid promotions, refuse responsibilities, prefer to stay in the background. Discomfort with recognition. You may do excellent work, but have learned that drawing attention was narcissistic or inappropriate, so you deflect praise, minimize achievements, feel uncomfortable with visibility. Self-sabotage of success. Unconsciously, you may sabotage growth opportunities because the wounded inner child believes they don't deserve success. This can manifest as procrastination on important projects, networking avoidance, or self-sabotage at crucial moments. This shadow of success is particularly cruel because it prevents you from experiencing real satisfaction with your achievements. You can have an objectively successful career, but subjectively feel empty, as if you're living someone else's life. Family patterns that shape the inner child. To understand why you feel like a fraud at work, it's essential to look at the family patterns that shaped your inner child. These patterns are like deep programming that continues operating in your adult life, especially in situations that activate authority and evaluation dynamics. The family perfectionism pattern. If you grew up in a family where only excellence was accepted, where good was never enough, your inner child learned that love is conditional on performance. At work, this manifests as a compulsive need to be perfect, where any error is interpreted as evidence of fundamental inadequacy. The constant comparison pattern. Families that constantly compared you to siblings, cousins, classmates, created an inner child who measures their worth always in relation to others. In the professional environment, this translates into a constant feeling that all colleagues are more competent, more intelligent, more deserving. The minimization pattern. If your childhood achievements were always minimized, anyone could have done that. You were lucky, it wasn't that difficult, you internalized the belief that your capabilities aren't special. As an adult, you automatically minimize your own professional achievements. The invisibility pattern. Some children learn that being seen is dangerous, that drawing attention brings negative consequences. These children become adults who, even being competent, prefer to remain invisible at work, avoiding promotions or recognition. The excessive responsibility pattern. Children who are parentified, forced to assume adult responsibilities prematurely, develop a hyper-vigilant inner child. At work, this manifests as a need to control everything, to assume excessive responsibilities, always afraid that something will go wrong. These patterns aren't conscious. They operate as automatic programs that are activated every time you find yourself in professional situations that echo these original family dynamics. Compulsive repetition in the professional environment. Jung observed that what is not made conscious returns as fate. In the professional context, this means you tend to unconsciously recreate the same family dynamics that wounded your inner child. If you grew up feeling you were never enough, you probably choose jobs or bosses that replicate this dynamic. You may be attracted to highly competitive environments, demanding bosses, or corporate cultures that only value results. If you learned that your worth depended on pleasing others, you probably become the yes person at work, taking on more than you can handle, avoiding conflicts, prioritizing others' needs over your own. If you internalize that you don't deserve success, you probably sabotage your own opportunities. This can be subtle, arriving a few minutes late to an important interview, not preparing adequately for a presentation, or simply not applying for positions you're qualified to occupy. This compulsive repetition isn't masochism. It's an unconscious attempt to resolve old traumas. It's as if your psyche is constantly trying to recreate the original situation, hoping that this time you can win the love and approval you didn't receive in childhood. But the problem is, you're trying to solve a child's wound using adult strategies, in contexts that have nothing to do with the original situation, and this never works because the wound isn't in the present, it's in the past, waiting to be seen and cared for directly. Individualization through work. Jung saw individuation as the process of becoming who you really are, integrating all parts of yourself into a conscious totality. The professional environment, paradoxically, can be both a place of fragmentation and individuation. When you feel like a fraud at work, it's because there's a division between your professional persona and your true essence. Individuation in the professional context involves healing this division, allowing your authenticity to also manifest in the work environment. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally uncontrolled or professionally inappropriate. It means stopping operating exclusively from the wounded inner child and beginning to also integrate your adult wisdom, your real competence, your genuine worth. The first step is recognizing that the feeling of being a fraud isn't based on present reality, but on past wounds. Your current competence isn't fictitious. Your achievements aren't accidental. Your worth isn't conditional on perfect performance. The second step is beginning to challenge automatic patterns. When you catch yourself minimizing an achievement, pause and ask yourself, where does this need to diminish my success come from? What wounded inner child is speaking now? The third step is learning to become a protective internal adult for your inner child. This means recognizing when they're scared at work and offering them the security and validation they need, without allowing them to make important decisions based on fear. The shadow of competence. One of Jung's most counterintuitive discoveries was that we frequently reject not only negative aspects of ourselves, but also positive aspects. In the professional context, this is especially relevant. Many people who feel fraudulent at work have actually pushed their own competence into the shadow. They may be genuinely talented, intelligent, capable, but for some reason learned that recognizing these qualities in themselves was dangerous. Maybe in the family of origin, demonstrating competence generated jealousy, rivalry, or punishment. Maybe drawing attention to your abilities was interpreted as arrogance. Maybe you learned it was safer to pretend incompetence than to assume your true capacity. The result is a person who can be extremely competent at work, but who can't recognize or accept this competence, who can have brilliant ideas, but always questions whether they're really good, who can lead projects successfully, but always feels like an imposter in the role. Integrating the shadow of competence means stopping denying your real qualities. It means recognizing that you can be intelligent without being arrogant, competent without being threatening, successful without being selfish. This requires an act of courage, because it means challenging deep family programming. It means reclaiming aspects of yourself that you learned to hide or deny. The fear of one's own greatness. Marianne Williamson wrote, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure." This observation is especially relevant for understanding why we feel fraudulent at work. For many people, the real fear isn't of failing, it's of succeeding. Because success means visibility, responsibility, elevated expectations. It means leaving the comfort zone of mediocrity and assuming your true capacity. The wounded inner child may have a complicated relationship with power and success. If they grew up in an environment where being small was safer, where drawing attention was dangerous, Where one person's success threatened others, they may have developed an unconscious aversion to their own greatness. At work, this manifests as a tendency to diminish yourself, to avoid growth opportunities, to settle for positions that are below your real potential, not from lack of capacity, but from fear of what success might bring. This fear of one's own greatness is a subtle form of self-sabotage. It's as if you're constantly putting a ceiling on your own potential, not because you can't achieve more, but because you're afraid of the consequences of achieving. Triggers in the professional environment. Certain situations at work can be powerful triggers for the wounded inner child, intensifying the feeling of being a fraud. Recognizing these triggers is essential to not being hijacked by them. Performance evaluations can reactivate memories of being judged, criticized, or never being enough. Even when the evaluation is positive, the inner child may interpret it as, "This time I managed to fool everyone." Promotions or recognition. Paradoxically, success can intensify impostor syndrome. The wounded inner child may interpret it as, "Now expectations are even higher, and I'm going to disappoint everyone." Presentations or visibility. Situations where you need to expose yourself can activate deep fears of being seen, judged, or rejected. The inner child may panic at the possibility of being discovered. Competition or comparison. Highly competitive environments can reactivate family dynamics where you always felt inferior or inadequate compared to others. Authority or hierarchy. Interactions with bosses or authority figures can reactivate parental dynamics, especially if you grew up with critical, demanding, or emotionally unavailable parents. Mistakes or criticism. Any form of negative feedback can be interpreted by the wounded inner child as evidence of fundamental inadequacy, not just as a learning opportunity. When you can identify these triggers, you can begin to respond to them more consciously, offering your inner child the support they need without allowing them to make important decisions based on fear. Healing through presence. Jung believed that healing happens through consciousness, not through denial or repression. In the context of imposter syndrome, this means learning to be present with the wounded inner child, without judgment, without rushing to fix everything. Presence is a radical act of self-love. It's the ability to be with your own experience, even when it's uncomfortable. It's stopping running from the feeling of being a fraud and beginning to investigate with curiosity and compassion where this feeling comes from. When you feel you're being a fraud at work, instead of criticizing yourself or trying to prove otherwise, you can pause and ask yourself, what part of me is feeling this way? What wounded inner child needs attention now? This compassionate presence allows the wounded inner child to be seen and heard, perhaps for the first time in decades, and when they're seen without judgment, something in you can begin to relax, to feel less fragmented. Presence also allows you to access your adult wisdom. You can recognize that yes, there's a part of you that feels like a fraud, and there's also a part that is genuinely competent. Both can coexist without one nullifying the other. Practical exercises for healing. 1. The letter to the professional inner child. Write a letter to your inner child about your professional life. Acknowledge their fears, validate their concerns, but also share the adult perspective about your real achievements. Start like this. Dear child, I know you're scared at work. I know you feel like you don't belong there, that you're pretending to know what you're doing. But I want to tell you about all the things you've really accomplished. Continue listing specific achievements, skills you've developed, problems you've solved. Talk to them as you would talk to a real child who needs encouragement. 2. The evidence journal. Create a journal where you record daily evidence of your competence. This can include positive feedback, problems you solved, correct decisions, moments of leadership. The goal isn't to brag, but to train your mind to notice and value your real contribution, something the wounded inner child may have difficulty doing automatically. 3. The empty chair technique for internal criticism. When you catch yourself with thoughts of, "I'm a fraud," imagine that this criticism is sitting in an empty chair in front of you. Dialogue with it. Ask, where do you come from? At what age did you start speaking? What original situation are you trying to protect me from repeating? Then, change chairs and respond from the perspective of the wounded inner child. This dialogue can reveal unconscious patterns and create space for new perspectives. 4. The transition ritual. Create a simple ritual to transition between your personal and professional life. This can be some deep breaths, an affirmation, or a moment of intention. During this ritual, mentally invite your inner child to come with you to work, but make it clear that you as an adult are in charge of important decisions. 5. The practice of appropriation. Every time you catch yourself minimizing an achievement or attributing success to luck, stop and consciously reframe. Instead of "it was luck," say "I prepared and seized the opportunity." Instead of "anyone could have done it," say "I used my specific skills to solve this." This practice trains your mind to recognize and appropriate your real competencies. Integration in the professional environment. As you integrate your wounded inner child and recognize your real competence, changes begin to happen naturally in your professional environment. You may notice you're less anxious before meetings, more willing to share ideas, more comfortable with recognition. You may start negotiating salaries with more confidence, applying for positions that previously seemed too much for you. These changes don't happen overnight, and they're not linear. There will be moments when the wounded inner child will be afraid again, when you'll feel like a fraud again. This is normal and expected. What changes is that now you have tools to deal with these moments. You can recognize when you're operating from the wounded inner child and choose to respond from your integrated adult wisdom, transforming imposter syndrome into wisdom. Paradoxically, the very feeling of being a fraud can become a source of wisdom and genuine humility. When you stop fighting against it and start dialoguing with it, you may discover it has something important to teach. The inner child who feels like a fraud may be protecting you from arrogance, reminding you to keep learning, keeping you connected to your humanity. When consciously integrated, they can become a valuable ally. Transformed imposter syndrome doesn't completely disappear, but changes quality. Instead of being a critical voice that paralyzes, it becomes a voice that keeps you humble, curious, willing to grow. You can recognize that there are things you don't know, and this is normal and even desirable. You can accept that you're in constant learning, and this is a strength, not a weakness. The return to integrity. Jung saw individuation as a return to integrity, not to perfection, but to completeness. In the professional context, this means integrating all parts of yourself, the wounded inner child, the professional persona, the real competence, the human vulnerability. When you stop trying to prove you're not a fraud and start simply being who you are, with your qualities and limitations, your achievements and growth areas, something fundamental changes. You stop living defensively and start living offensively. Stop trying to hide your supposed inadequacies and start contributing from your real strengths. Stop trying to be perfect and start being authentic. This authenticity at work isn't just liberating for you, it's inspiring for others. When you stop pretending to be invulnerable and start being genuinely competent and human, you create space for others to also be authentic. The wounded inner child who felt like a fraud can finally relax, knowing they're being cared for by a reliable internal adult, and this internal adult can assume their legitimate place in the professional world, contributing not despite their history, but through it. Because in the end, feeling like a fraud wasn't about incompetence, it was about not feeling deserving of recognition, love, success. And when you finally recognize yourself as deserving, not for being perfect, but for being human, everything changes. If this message touched something in you, if you recognized yourself in this journey of feeling like a fraud at work, leave a sincere comment. I choose to recognize my real worth. This phrase is more than a comment. It's a commitment to a new way of relating to yourself in the professional environment. It's the first step to stop feeling like a fraud and start recognizing yourself as the competent and valuable person you've always been. And if this content made a difference in your life, consider supporting this work by clicking the Thank You button below. Each contribution, however small, allows us to continue creating deep and transformative content, reaching people who, like you, are ready to make peace with their inner child and live their professional truth. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having the courage to look inside. Thank you for choosing healing over repetition. See you in the next video.